Tara Bachland here with yet another interview with one of our prized herbalists at the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism, where you've seen me host a number of classes and you've likely seen me elsewhere in the health and wellness community. And today I'm here with Amanda Nicole, who has taught and participated, co-taught with Matthew Wood in a number of classes. One in particular that he mentions all the time is bat and holly medicine. Amanda teaches plant attunement, animal medicines, just really fascinating classes at the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism, which I encourage you to check out. And after you hear what we have to discuss today in her journey in herbalism, I'm sure you'll be more and more intrigued to check out classes with her personally as well. So thank you very much, Amanda, for joining me today.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad to be here. It's going to be fun.
Well, we've already had a great chat to begin with, and I'm so glad that we caught up. And through this Becoming an Herbalist series, what I hope to illustrate is that there are many ways to, quote, be an herbalist. And first and foremost, if you are a family herbalist and you're the herbalist, quote, of your family, that is a very important role and not to be overlooked at all. But if you feel a calling to be of service and in your greater community as an herbalist, I have come to know a number of herbalists through Matthew Wood in particular, and your journeys and your stories are so unique and inspiring. And I just wanted to interview to hopefully help and inspire others as well. Mm-hmm. So first of all, did you grow up in the herbal realm? Was it a part of your life?
No, it wasn't a part of my life. And I laugh because a few years back, I met a woman and she asked me what I did. And at the time, I could simply answer, I'm an herbalist. And she said, what's that? And I said, I use plants as medicine, for the body and for the spirit. And she said, I didn't even know you could be that when you grew up. And I just laughed. It was a great phrase. And I said, I didn't either. I didn't. You're given, well, when I was small, you're given 5 things you can be when you grow up. You can be a teacher, an accountant, a nurse, in my situation, a missionary. You get these choices. And so it wasn't a part of my life at all. We used normal allopathic Western medicine, lots of antibiotics. I had lots of shots when I was small, for sore throats and things like that. But also in my experience growing up, we didn't use the term herbalism. That wasn't a word that we knew. But anyone that was what I now know an herbalist to be, dressed a certain way, had maybe some crystals, burned some incense, was a little too into their garden, maybe had a certain way of viewing the world. They were labeled pagan or new age or those sorts of phrases because I was growing up in the conservative Christian church. And even witchcraft was a term, that was used. And so this way of being was not available, but also the possibility of it looked down on and not acceptable. So this is quite a shift from how I grew up.
Mm-hmm. So at what point did herbs come into your life?
Mm-hmm. Well, this is sort of an interesting answer to this question. I was always drawn to this way of being. Mm-hmm. So if I read a book or I watched a movie or a television show when I was small, the woman that was the witch, and I know that word is very loaded in its connotation, but you'll see where I'm going. The woman that was the witch, or the person that was earth-based and earth-centered, or the woman, on the edge of civilization, mixing something. I was drawn to that, but it was forbidden. And so, but it was in me, this draw. There's this series of books by this author, Philip Pullman. They're young adult books. His Dark Materials is the name of the series. And the witches in those books, they wear like rich green velvet dresses, and they're very earth-based, and they're actually very protective, and they sort of move through the world helping this little girl on her journey, and I was so drawn to that. But it wasn't allowed, and then I grew up and I got married and I became a pastor's wife and I had children, and the conservative nature of my upbringing became even more conservative when I was older, and it made me sick, to be honest. I mean, physically ill, a lot of the things that I experienced. And so I started to miscarry. After my third child, I had 6 consecutive miscarriages, and allopathic Western medicine said, your blood work looks fine. It's a phase. I mean, who even says it's a phase? How do you go to school to say that's a phase? You know?
Like something a parent would say, you know?
Yeah. And they tried to say, you've had 3, just be grateful. Well, I was grateful, but something's wrong with my body. And so they weren't helpful. They just weren't helpful. And so I did what a lot of people do, which is self-diagnose. And I ordered this book. Let's see. The Infertility Cure. I can't remember the author now, but when it arrived, I saw on the cover, it was written from a traditional Chinese medicine perspective, TCM, which I knew nothing about at the time, except it's pagan. Mm-hmm. It's alternative. It's bad. So I thought, oh, I'm going to have to send this back. But when I opened it and saw the table of contents, there was a chapter on immunological infertility, which is how I was self-diagnosing. And so I read that chapter, and the way it described what was happening in the body was me. So I decided I had to find an acupuncturist, even though that was also frowned upon. And I did. And she would send me home with little brown bags full of literally twigs and sticks. I have a picture on my computer somewhere of all those years ago of taking a picture of the inside of the bag. And she told me how to make a decoction. That was the first taste of that I ever received. And so I would come home and make these decoctions. I would shiver with drinking them. But she said, you will at first, but if it's what your body needs, you'll come to crave it. And I did, like within a matter of days. And so that's what opened up the door. And also at the time, I started attending births as a midwifery student, home births. And I did that for maybe 4 or 5 years. And I attended some very difficult births. And I needed a rest. And I was hosting our local birth circle at the time. And one of the women in it said, did you know there's an herbal school like 30 minutes from here? She said, could our birth circle take a field trip to this herbal school? I was like, what? Because all I'd been doing was, sort of dabbling, but I wasn't really sure where to look because I still had that fear of, what if I get the wrong book and it's bad, or it carries me down this dangerous path, Mm-hmm. So we did a field trip, and that's how I learned about Teresa Borwein and the Green Comfort School of Herbal Medicine, which is where I also connected with Matt eventually. And I called her after the field trip and said, I'm tired of people, because I was, because it's everywhere, between midwife dynamics and church dynamics. I was so tired. So I said, I'm tired of people. I want to come spend time with plants. And so I went and started taking classes with Teresa. And I remember the first class when I went into her yurt. I hadn't been to any classes she taught. I'd had a one-on-one session with her for herbs with the miscarriages, pairing up with the acupuncture. And I was sitting in the yurt, and everybody's finding their places and getting their tea. And it's got a certain fragrance to the room and the light and the feel. And Chetney was started to teach, and I started to cry because I knew, I did it. I found my place. I'm going to start to cry now. I found it. I'm home again. So that's how I got there. And I will say the first Western plant that I remember, well, I have to slow down, but the first Western plant that I remember sort of touching me that's still with me is chamomile. Because the acupuncturist said to me, you need to leave. You need to get away. If you can move, you need to move. But I couldn't because I was the pastor's wife at this church. But I did find a way to get away for a month at a little house in Southwest Virginia. It had 4 rooms, and I was able to take my 3 kids with me. And it was just for dollars a day. It was actually for pastors' families to rest. And for some reason, I do not even know why, because I don't even know how I would have known what it was. I bought a box of chamomile tea, and I can still see it in my head in one of those, like, what is it, Cornell type dishes, and the way it smelled. And I have drank a cup of chamomile tea, or drunk, which one is it, for almost every evening since then. It's almost 10 years. Because of the medicine it's given me in so many ways, namely to make space, like to start making space for certain things. So that's how it began.
That's lovely in itself. There's so many directions to go. So when she said that, to get away, do you know what she was getting at, or was it kind of inferred? What was that about?
I knew what she meant. So the church was extremely stressful for me. And maybe people will be listening that have had experiences in the church, and they will understand as a congregate, as a member of the congregation. But I was the pastor's wife. That's a whole other level of stuff going on, because you're a public person and you have to present a certain way. And then I was a pastor's wife in an extremely conservative church. So no musical instruments, observing the Sabbath, women covered their heads, just a lot, excommunications, very strict. So I couldn't talk about a lot of things that I had liked before then, or still liked, a movie or a book or a radio program. I mean, God forbid you listen to NPR. I don't listen to NPR anymore, but I did then, but I tried to do it secretly, so I had all these books that I stuffed in my room. So it was very stressful, wearing a mask and not being able to be sad when you're sad. Like, I remember one time this woman in the church, she was really having a difficult time. I can't remember all the details now, but she was moving through some stuff. And she started crying in the middle of the service, not because she was moved by the divine, but just life hurts. And she got up to leave I want to say sanctuary, but not really. So anyway, I went out with her to check in on her, to see how she was. And we spoke, and, she started to feel a little better for the moment and went back in. And I stayed out in the hallway for a minute and thought to myself, I'll never get to do that. I'll never get to just cry and be sad and say what's hurting me. So when I started miscarrying, I can't go to church and be sad. I remember in our previous conversation before this interview started, you used the word brave about something I was talking about. And you said, I'm sure people have used the word brave. The first time anybody ever used that word with me was a woman in the church during those miscarriages, because I would bleed on a Saturday, and not a little bit, and even be lightheaded and, having trouble standing up because of blood loss. And I'd have to go to church and, hi, how are you? How are you doing? And I meant it, but like, not today. Today it would be great if someone asked me how I'm doing, but I can't. You have to be strong. And so one of the women in the church knew that I had, about the miscarriages, because it was kind of kept under wraps, but I did have a couple of friends in the congregation. And she said to me one morning, you're so brave to come to church this morning. And I was like, is that what this is? That's what it's feeling. So when she said, you have to move, it was because my body did not feel safe. There was a lot of division. There was a lot of yeah, just constant division. Someone was always mad about something that had to do with doctrine or practice. And then just normal life things. I couldn't just be sad or be happy, because you also had to be modest. So,
Mhm.
like, when I found out that Matt was coming to Teresa's, this is really funny. She knew how I felt about Matt and his books and how much they resonated with me. So I came into Teresa's yurt one day, and she said, "Amanda, I got something for you." And she hands me this piece of paper when we still did like piece of papers and flyers. And on it, it said, Matthew Wood, these dates, Green Comfort School of Herbal Medicine. And I just spontaneously, instinctually let out I won't do it on here because the mic won't let out this yelp, and like took the paper to my heart. And women, we were in the yurt and the house was up from the yurt. Women ran down from the house and came in and said, "Is she okay? Is everything okay?" Because, she's quiet. She's, you have to present a certain way. And she just lost it. And I remember Matt saying to me when he came to those classes, because that's when I started to remember too about trauma when I was small in that same season, in those classes when he came. He said to me, "You're going to have to get back in touch with your animal self." And there's a lot of layers to that. But part of it was I needed to be in my body, but I wasn't, because I wasn't allowed to feel anything because the body was bad and I had to wear a mask and there was a role to play. So basically my body needed to feel safe and like it could grieve and it could cry and it could be angry and it could feel, it can move all the emotions through it instead of storing them in my liver or my womb or my spleen or my heart and having these physical symptoms.
So interesting that the word came around to brave again, because right after I said that, I thought actually what you do, what I see, and it can go several months since we've talked last, and there's always this incredible update, but it's courage, and because it involves your heart. To me, brave is like external, and brave, I think I said that, and even hearing that woman that's saying that too, if you don't know how to tap into courage, that internal, it could look like bravery. But I think someone who, if you've understood courage, where that comes from, like there's just there's kind of a burning, a kindle, something going on inside. It's really courage. It's from the heart.
Yeah, I love that you said that because it means I can mention tulip poplar, which I love.
Yeah.
But tulip poplar has always shown me a golden heart, always, from the beginning. Not a green heart or a red heart or a pink heart. Tulip poplar has a golden heart. And there's a lot of layers to that. But one of them is it's courage. So you have the heart, chakra or energy space, but you've got the solar plexus, which we think of as being yellow, and you merge them and it's courage. And I'm going to read you this quote that's on my wall. And I want to give credit for this quote. This quote was spoken by my friend, a gentleman, Lance Howard, just like a gem of a human being, like his love for the earth and the way he sees it does not get enough credit. And he was actually writing sort of in defense of my Into Sophie interviews, my interviews with trees. He didn't really need to defend it, but he was feeling, if we're talking about courage, like, a knight with a shield to defend the way I am with plants. And in it, he wrote this sentence, and it just floored me because he embodied this tree in one sentence and just blew me away. So I'm going to read it. Tulip poplar communicates with fully open heart, without fear, because its divinity is transparent to its consciousness. And I just get chills with that, because that courage, a fully open heart, like you face the world with your heart without fear. And then the reason he gave for why tulip poplar does that is because its divinity is transparent to its consciousness. It knows who it is. And I feel like that's what tulip poplar starts to teach us. You can be courageous. You can face the world with an open heart because of who you are. You, for me, in my case, the way it will speak to me, and this is true of everybody, but we might not all use the same words, but you are a divine daughter. You are a divine being and eternal and infinite. By all means, say how you feel. Speak your truth, do your thing.
How did you start to do that? In that pressure, it sounds like a pressure cooker of an environment.
Mm-hmm. Well, at first, I didn't do it in a very tulip poplar way, or at least not how I've come to know tulip poplar, because as you said, it's a pressure cooker. So what are we going to tend to do? We're going to tend to explode. Now I didn't explode at church. I knew better than that. And I had enough self-control not to explode at church. But at home, I just sometimes would tell my husband at the time, who was the pastor, like, sorry, I don't know, are we allowed to say certain words? I don't know. But, where the hell are we? I mean, it's church, but like that, this is what it feels like. So violet medicine. Violet's very useful because it helps us begin to say things in a violet way. So you might be angry, you might be hurting, you might have a truth to say, but then violet helps us say it in an edifying, productive way. So beginning to work with the plants, with violet, even with tulip poplar at the time, the acupuncturist, she was just such a gift. Her name's Kyung Lee. She's in Charlottesville, Virginia. I mean, there are people that come into your life and, they change everything. I'm going to get teary-eyed again. She was one of those people. She saw me. She heard me. So some of it was even just balancing the body. But when she said, can you get away? I did. I did find a place. And it was in Southwest Virginia. And the children and I went there. And while I was there, I worked with milk thistle, chamomile, just the earth, deer medicine. And I came back and sat down with the elders of the church and said, now, granted, I'm at this point, maybe I've had 5 of the 6 miscarriages at this point. I sat them down and said, if you haven't noticed, I'm not well. So I won't be hosting any more parties or receptions. And I won't be having any more overnight guests until I'm well enough. So you guys are going to need to work that out and make other plans, and so that ability to even have that courage of having them maybe reject me, which they all did eventually, was part of starting to work with those plants, violet, tulip poplar, and then have the acupuncture where the body's being supported. And I can't speak to the Chinese herbs she gave me. I never became conversant in the ones that she offered to me. And so who knows what magic was in those bags, to bring things along. But I just started to, very small, but I started to value myself. And that's also the plants. Oh yeah, rose. I mean, spritzing rose water on my face every day for almost 2 years. Because with the miscarriages, I was worried about what I was putting into my body, hormone disruptors. And so I stopped using like certain lotions and shampoos, but my face, it needed something, And so I found rose water, but even rose every day for 2 years, self-love, and rose, betrayal. Stop betraying yourself. You know what I mean? So I don't really know what the mechanism was. It was a group of allies, human and otherwise. And then even as we're speaking, like I can feel it like a fire that starts to light inside of you because you decide, and I did decide this, I want to live. I'm tired of not really being alive and not really living and maybe even physically dying, in this current state. So lighting a little bit of a fire for life. Does that help answer that question? It's kind of complex and a process.
It is. This, I'm sure, will blossom into other interviews, because I think of other questions. And I'm like, oh, but I want to stay on topic.
Got to stay on track.
But no, I'm loving what you're saying. So no complaints there by any means. It's just so rich. Because I think what you're addressing too, there are nuances of what I think a lot of women go through in different ways. And one of the questions, okay, maybe I'll insert it here, is it's so easy in a way to deny yourself and say, okay, I know something's wrong, but you ended with value yourself. And it's like, oh, is she reading my mind? Like that's kind of the answer. And what I hear, it's almost like at the same time, we're kind of having a conversation, because you answer it is like, then I ask myself, well, how does one learn how to value themselves in that kind of situation? And I'm like, oh, but she just said this series of plants helped her along the way. And so it didn't even, I mean, it seems like it was monumental in ways, but it happened bit at a time.
Yes, it was monumental. And it did happen a little bit at a time. And when I look back now, I realize how much was breaking open and falling apart. And I didn't even realize it. You know, sometimes I want to warn people. Like, I've had some people say to me over the years, you need a warning label with your one-on-one sessions. And they don't mean it negatively. They're happy. They're glad life is different, but you might not keep that job. You might not stay in that relationship. You might not put up with that particular pattern anymore. You might move. I mean, life might change, you know, because as we change internally, the external begins to change. And so I say that because when I went and gathered those violets out of my yard, because I was like, oh, look at all these violets that are in my yard. They're so pretty. I didn't know at the time that they were like, you have a lot you need to say. You have a lot you need to grieve. You need to find your voice. When I put rose on my face, I didn't know that it was saying to me, we're not going to keep betraying ourselves, Amanda. We need to learn to love ourselves. Even as, you know, I mentioned Tulip Poplar before in our pre-interview conversation, when it gave me some of those first messages, you know, impenetrable fortress, I didn't know that was me. I thought it was the tree. Now, what does it mean to be an impenetrable fortress all those years ago? What was it telling me? We're going to have to work on how to be vulnerable. We're going to have to learn, we're going to have to work on how to open our heart up again. You know, all these things, and you just don't even know. You just think, I'm going to go sit under this tree, or I'm going to drink a cup of chamomile. And then suddenly the dominoes start to fall. Good dominoes.
Yeah.
But they start to fall. And you look back and realize, like you said, something was monumental, and you thought it was just mundane.
It's so interesting what comes out of each herbalist's path in each interview, you know, because yours is so, I think they all are intertwined with personal development and, you know, just their journey in life. But yours is totally, you know, like, totally
it is. Yeah.
So how do you, I almost don't even know what question is next. Is like, how do you go from the pastor's wife and you're like coming out of your cocoon to your new life and being an herbalist? What is an, I think from what I hear, you as an herbalist today are even different from several years ago. So maybe can you highlight a few of the milestones as an herbalist that you've made?
Yeah, I can. I've been working very hard on alchemizing things and how to articulate them. So I had the class with Teresa. Well, first I'll pause before I go on the practical part. When you said, you know, you're just like this, the phrase that came into my mind is a phrase that Tulip Poplar and I have together, which is, I am the tree and the tree is me. And when I began to teach herbal medicine and I began to have my own classes, I had two series I began with. One was called Reenchantment, which was exactly what it sounds like. Let's re-enchant ourselves with the world. So, plant communication and magic ways of being in the world. And then the other, so, and that was just maybe, I think it was like, one Saturday a month or every Saturday a month, so, a short series. But the other was embodied herbalism, which I taught for several years. And it was one of those, 9-month stretches. But the idea was to embody the medicine. Now, after I started teaching that, and I hadn't heard the word embodied, it became a buzzword, not because of me, but I guess it was just in the collective air. But at the time, I hadn't heard it. And what I meant was, what if we could become this? What if we could know the plants so intimately and take them into ourselves so fully that we are rose? So when we sit with someone, they're experiencing rose as if it was in a bodily form. So that's what I thought. How can we become the medicine where it's us? And that is a huge part of my journey. Maybe I mentioned this in some of the classes with Matt, but where American Holly said to me, I need a body. And I said, sure, again, not knowing what you're getting ready to say, but can you embody the medicine of American Holly? Or Tulip Poplar and I, we're just like, I call myself deliriodendrous. I made it up, and it means the human embodiment of the tulip poplar tree, a son or daughter of the tulip poplar tree. We, to become one. So that's a big part of medicine for me is, can we come to know these other beings so intimately that we embody them? Because really, in my mind, we're all working from the same consciousness anyway. We're just each these individual embodiments and expressions of it. Okay. Practically, after Teresa, I took the classes with Teresa. She had a foundations, and then she had a clinical course. And so I did that with her. That's when I met Matt. Also, Ashley Ellenboss, I met her there. She has Sky House, which it was in Maryland. She's in Minnesota now. And so that's where I got the sort of foundational training of plants, their herbal actions, how to put a formula together, how to create a protocol, which systems of the body. And then from that place, I sort of hung out for a while because I didn't feel like I should go around and say, I'm an herbalist and I can teach you something. Right. But I remember Matt and I having a conversation about Lady Slipper at one point during all that. And he said to me, well, you're just going to have to get over that, because I said it's kind of presumptuous. And he was like, you get over it, but it took me some time, and I just preferred it to happen organically. And it did. People knew what I did, and they listened to me have conversations. And so they started coming for sessions. So I think the next sort of milestone for me was when I started teaching my own classes, which I mentioned, the embodied herbalism class and re-enchantment series. And I taught some with Ashley at Sky House at that time with her apprenticeship program. But during that time period, I wrote my book, Flowers for a Girl, Plant Medicine and Sexual Trauma. And that was a very big milestone for me as well as an herbalist, because again, like you said, everything's so intertwined. There was the personal healing and the personal medicine, but to just put that out into the world, and it needs to go further into the world, because I'm still not aware of a book that focuses on medicine for sexual trauma and abuse. There might be, I'm just not aware of it. But to just use my voice in that way and say not only that this happened, but that the plants are powerful enough to occasion the needed shifts emotionally and physically, and also to present it the way I presented it, because if someone has read it, they'll know that it's not your usual violet is used in these 6 ways for this, or rose is used in these 10 ways. No, it's poetic, it's a story. So it's word medicine, it's spirit medicine, it's the energy of the story. it's becoming the medicine. So that was a big shift for me as well. Then teaching, honestly, at the Matthew Wood Institute, for this, there's a lot of reasons, but for this one mainly in our conversation, coming sort of full circle in a way, having Matt having been my teacher and then teaching with him, in the animal medicine class, and becoming more of a colleague or a peer, rather than a student. And just having him say to me sometimes in that, I don't know the exact words, but he would just sometimes acknowledge, wow, you've become this way or that way. And this is your thing that you do. And I don't know anything about that. That's yours. I remember, this is a tiny little moment, but it's an adorable moment. So before I started to teach classes, when I was still concerned about being presumptuous, Matt had written his pulse book, his pulse diagnosis book. And I was supposed to be with him doing clinical sessions with him, like as a student. And the book had just come out and I wanted him to sign it. And he told me after the sessions that evening, he would sign it. And that's a great story too. That's in the YouTube, so I won't go into it, but that's a great story of that evening. But that night after that session, he signed my pulse book. And I didn't look at it right then, but as we were leaving, he said to me, and it was interesting because we were sitting at the door of the yurt and we were getting ready to do this, like really go our opposite ways. And we had just started. And he stopped and turned and said, if you ever want to be a part of the American Herbalist Guild, I'll vouch for you, because I don't know how it is now, but, you had to have people sort of speak on your behalf. And it meant so much to me. And I went home and read the inside of the book, which I wish I could pull off my shelf, but it's too far away right now. Mm-hmm. But he wrote in it a really kind note. And I remember the phrase, a fellow herbalist. So there is a moment where it's significant when we're recognized by our teachers or our peers and sort of kind of, I don't mean this in a negative way. I mean this in a very positive way, but brought into the fold or the community in a certain way. So, but also teaching at the Matthew Wood Institute was significant for me because I made some really significant choices when I started teaching at the Institute. And one of the choices that I made, as you know, was not to pursue teaching herbal classes in the same way. The Institute, rightly so, has a certain way of presenting classes. It's meant to be a certain style, and didactic in a certain way for training. And I decided I'm going to go all in with myself. I'm going to go all in with plant spirit medicine, plant communication, plant consciousness, tulip poplar, being creative, because that's my flavor. That's my brand. And I'm so glad I did that. Like sometimes I've looked back and thought, Amanda, if you hadn't made that decision, things might be financially easier at the moment. And I'm like, but if I hadn't made that decision, I wouldn't have these other opportunities and I wouldn't be being myself. And the financial part will come and is coming, So that was a big decision. And then when as we spoke before the interview, when I was accepted into the master's program for ecology, spirituality, and religion at the California Institute of Integral Studies, that's a huge deal because it's like this way of owning that who I am and what I do is valuable. And it has something to contribute to the larger conversation. And that even though a lot of times, especially in the wider world, especially outside of herbalism, maybe even in herbalism sometimes, we want to sort of pigeonhole things and put them into a box and keep them small. It was a way of me saying, I'm not interested in that. I need a bigger space. And I'm valid and I can have a place at the table, a table that's not necessarily an herbal table. I can sit here with these people. So that was important. I mentioned to you Yale upcoming at the Yale Conference on Religion and Ecology one of my Into Sophie interviews will be there. This is a huge deal because it's mattered to me to be a conduit for the plants and the medicine that they offer, not only to the body, but the spirit and the larger human collective and our wider story. And then I started writing the Tulip Poplar book. This is huge for me. It's why I'm here. I don't know. There's probably more things, but that's probably enough to move the timeline along.
Well, you've really had, in the time that I've known you, the last several years, you have had these real epochs in like phases, is probably a simpler way to say it. And as you were saying that you decide to go deeper into, the embodiment and teaching your, let's just say, method of herbalism, what occurred to me is like you're stepping deeper and deeper into what you explain as like tulip poplar medicine, being more courageous, being more, your genuine self, starting with, even sharing with your elders, I have not been well, and that I'm sure that it's just been layer upon layer. And I'm sure this will be inspiring to someone who, because you had mentioned also space. I need more space than what is given, even within an herbal community. You're saying I need more space, even getting outside of the herbal box, so to speak. And I love this because in the series on becoming an herbalist, I wanted to elucidate how many paths there are, and there's so many that we can't imagine. And you're the embodiment of, you got to follow this, even despite the pressure cooker, the boxing in that's going on around you. And I find it so interesting how often in life I see that when we're raised a certain way in a certain environment, people have kids that end up pushing those boundaries.
We do not turn out the way they thought or hoped we would. Right. It's interesting. I want to say this is so important, and I am so glad this is coming up in this interview. I have had people in the past interested in taking one of my herbal classes, but then they'll write to me and say, but I don't want to be an herbalist. I'm an accountant, right? Mm-hmm. And I'll say to them, you don't have to be an herbalist, because in my experience, the study with the plants, time with the plants, is actually not about becoming an herbalist, though you might, and a lot of people do. But it's actually about becoming yourself. And I like to speak about the plants as, the phrase I have for them is instruments of incarnation. That's what they are. They know exactly who they are. They embody their aspect of the divine fully, unequivocally, like the Tulip Poplar quote. They are clear. They're not confused. We are a little confused. It's a little muddy over here. So they come, and in my experience, they sort of push buttons and flip switches inside of us to help us remember who we are and what aspect of the divine we're here to embody. So you may be an accountant, but you can also be an herbalist, which in my world is just, you look at the plants as more than wood to make your table. I know there's like other definitions, but for me, an herbalist is just someone that engages with the plants in a way that is not, they're just a commodity, like beyond just, when we say medicine, it's for the body, the soul, the spirit. Like, you're recognizing there is an energy here. There's something to be offered here beyond, trees make pencils and paper. You know what I'm saying? So you can be both. And what I've also found is, and I'm one of these people in a way, sometimes people will go on the path and they'll become an herbalist. And then they have this, existential crisis of who am I? What is my identity? Because suddenly they find themselves moving outside of the expected practice and definition of herbalism. And it's like, it's okay, because all you really need to do is be yourself. And here's the thing, once you are with the plants, they never leave you. Okay, there's a Joni Mitchell song that I like, Case of You. I love it. Highly recommend that song. And there's a line in it where she says, I'm a lonely painter. I live in a box of paints. And she says that the person she's singing about, that part of you pours out of me from time to time, like as she's painting, like it's there. And this is how the plants are. Once you meet them, you're not ever going to do anything in your life that they won't be there for, that they won't be present for, that they won't influence, that you won't somehow draw them in, to talk about them. And so now for myself, I'm going to write, or I've made music and I'm still writing songs, or I've got this idea for a play, or I'm a mom. That's what I mainly do all day, every day, or someone may have these other things, but you're here to be yourself. And so if people are thinking the box is too small, it was like meant to be busted open.
Mm-hmm. You're saying such pivotal things, and I really apologize that I look distracted.
I get it.
Got a kitten a couple months ago, and she woke up from her nap.
I know. I have kids, they wake up from their naps, or my computer's going to die, or this or that.
Well, I feel like it's bad manners in being the interviewer, especially, but I was like, gosh, she was just fine a minute ago, and now she just left. But and at a pivotal point, because Amanda, what you were saying about the time, I can only imagine being in your shoes at the time that you were, a pastor's wife, and then the herbalist or the acupuncturist is suggesting taking time away. I mean, how do you do that as a mom, as a pastor's wife? You made it happen. It sounds like there are a couple key points too, that you listened. Like, it sounds like you trust, you listen and trust. And there's probably a feeling, I imagine, like, oh yeah, that feels right along the way. But also to say that, so I can only imagine being in your situation. Like, that's like a breaking point. Like, I could imagine a person could either implode and like kind of lose it, or like you said, it is a journey to becoming yourself. And I think that's a great message too, because we get fooled, and I'm going to speak for myself, thinking that, oh, I went to school for music, or I went to school for this. And then you think you are that. But no, it was an interest that you followed that stirred up something inside of you that's a part of you. But our mission is actually to find that deeper part. And those are just pieces. And I think what you said, it resonates so true that, I went through, for example, yoga teacher training, and my husband actually encouraged me to do it. Not actually, I don't know. And it just seemed very supportive at the time. And because I didn't bring it to him, he actually brought it to me. And I thought, well, I don't think I want to be a yoga teacher. He's like, well, you'd be surprised. I mean, just, I think it could be a good experience for you. And those experiences like that do actually help you excavate what's inside of you.
Yes.
I think what you said is really beautiful. And in having known you for several years, but really having just intermittent talks, what I think is really amazing about you, where you could have kind of got off the deep end, and people might think, oh, she talks to the plants, she's kind of out there. But what I see and hear in you is you are more grounded and centered than many people I know, and then ever. It's like you can feel that inner knowing. And when you say that, like, the plants are a journey sorry, I'm not quoting you exactly, but to finding yourself.
Yes.
It rings true.
Yeah. And even that inner knowing, like you said, trusting, that was its own journey, which also the plants were my companions for, because I was told, repeatedly when I was small, do not follow your heart. And they would use a Bible verse that says, the heart is deceitful above all things. Who can know it? I wrote a poem about that. But, but what I found is, no, my heart is good and pure, and my heart knows. But there's been a journey to that. And one of the plants was rose, because it helps me return to my heart and begin to trust my heart again. And that betrayal aspect of not to betray myself, listen. Or violet taught me, listen to the voices that love you. Well, what voice is going to love me more than my own heart? Or tulip poplar pointing out that, what is my heart? Well, my heart is golden, and my heart is a portal to the divine and to source. I am not separate. So if I can tap into that space, I can trust that, it's true. And you're right, it's practice. Because people will say, even in the plant communication classes, how do I know that I heard what I heard, right? And it's just practice. You practice, and then you're able to start to discern the difference between your voice and their voice, until you realize it's actually not separate. This is the same voice. This is your heart speaking. It's just very interesting how it comes full circle. But it's a knowing and practice and trusting. And this is also a beautiful thing with the plants. The world is noisy. It's just a cacophony. I don't even know how people leave radios and televisions and social media on constantly, it would just be overwhelming. But the lovely thing about the plants is they bring us back to a stillness inside of us. And they begin to help us listen to that voice, which is, for each of us, our true north. They help us return to that internal compass. It's so valuable. I love the plants so much for what they've done for my physical body and the physical body of people that I love, even the healing that I experienced, because I went on to have 3 more children, and really lovely births and so many ways. So I'm very thankful for that. But the way that they have touched my soul, my spirit, is just invaluable, and what I think is the apex of why they're here. It's one of the reasons I appreciate Matt so much, because he makes so much room for that part of the plants.
Mm-hmm.
So even that has been a journey and a practice. And I appreciate you saying that I seem grounded, because there have been moments where I wasn't sure I was going to remain so, but even then the plants come in. As literal as roots,
mm-hmm.
To just find the grounding and the solidness. I can just feel it as we talk. I'm really thankful for the centeredness that they offer.
Mm-hmm. I hope this isn't off-putting, but I think you would have a very unique perspective on this. Do you think a person can be a Christian while even embodying the plants as you're speaking about?
I do. I've actually been asked that question before I don't know how to word this. Either before I stepped outside of the church or before they kicked me out. I think it was simultaneous. I would have people say to me, they would come for sessions or classes, and then they would know I was a pastor's wife. And they would say, how can you be an herbalist and a Christian? Because what are we all taught? Even if you're outside the church, you're taught that these things are contrary and opposing. And when I was having my experience with the miscarriages, and I was looking into acupuncture and I was taking these herbs, I was keeping it on the down low, because if you have to cover your head and only sing the Psalms and not celebrate Christmas, and some people have trouble with women wearing pants, you probably can't go to an acupuncturist. You know what I'm saying? And I'm the pastor's wife. He could, and this wouldn't have necessarily been bad, but get fired, not be able to be the pastor there anymore if the people aren't happy. So I was torn about it because I thought I want to heal, but I want to heal and be with God. You know, I don't want to be without the divine. And so one morning I was sort of having that in my mind as a prayer. This has been now 13, 14 years ago. And I let my Bible fall open, and it fell open to, I'm not very good with this anymore, but it's either Revelation 21 or Revelation 22. And it's speaking of a tree in heaven. And it says, the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the people. And I thought, okay, that's my answer. Because as above, so below, as on earth, so in heaven. Even Christians speak that way. If it's not so that the leaves here are for the healing of the people, then saying that the leaves of the tree in heaven are for the healing of the people mean nothing. The symbol is useless. So this was my answer. And then I began to notice things in the Bible, like there's a king, Hezekiah, and he's sick. He has some sort of sore, but it's going to kill him. And the prophet Isaiah is instructed to go with a poultice of certain plants to put on it, and that's what will heal him. Or you have the story of Naaman, who had leprosy in the Bible, and he doesn't even use a plant. He's told to go into a certain river and dip himself 10 times, right? Or you have people at the pool of Bethesda, and all of these sick and dying people around this pool. And it's said that occasionally an angel comes and touches the water, and the first person to get to the water is healed. But Jesus shows up and heals the man there and says, you don't need the water, take up your bed and walk. You know, Jesus goes down and gets into the clay and gets clay and uses the clay to heal. You know, I wrote this poem that said something along the lines, I'm not going to quote it exactly, but you know, that he turned water into wine and said, this is my body and this is my blood, and you call me a witch? I know that can upset a lot of people, but in the Christian church, they say Jesus was a healer, and he was. Mm-hmm. And so look at how he was healing with clay, with words, the plants. So I don't think it's separate at all. I think that I was raised to believe that the earth was created by God, the Christian creation story. That's what I was told about how the world began. And so sometimes I've said to Christians that I'm with, it's all created by the divine. It all belongs to God. And so why would we think that God just came to save our souls, but not our bodies? Why wouldn't we think that God gave a remedy not only for our spirits, but for our bodies? This is good and well. Can it be misused? Are there people that misuse it? Yes, but that's true of everything. But just because something's misused doesn't mean that it's bad. That's actually part of the Tulip Poplar book that I'm writing recently, because I was writing about an event that happened when I was younger that involves sexual abuse and sexual trauma. And Tulip Poplar said, no matter how you're touched or mishandled, it doesn't change who you are. It doesn't change your essence, you know? So for me, there's no difference. I know that a lot of people in the church now would say, you know, she's not a Christian because of the way she speaks and talks, which is fine because I'm not really into labels. But I love Jesus, and I want to be with God, and I love the divine, you know, and so I'm okay with those things. But I do think that is another part of why I'm here, is a bridge, if possible, to help to translate some of the ways that these ways of being are not separate. They're actually very beautifully, I think, complementary. And both sides are kind of missing out on not gleaning from what is present in the other. Mm-hmm. That was a kind of a fiery little response, but
I like it. No, it's good. And I've been thinking about it more and more lately. And even when you brought up, you know, abusing whether it's maybe an allopathic, allopathic medicines can be abused and natural medicines can be abused, is that misappropriating the power? Is that, in a sense, making it an idol? You put a different, a misappropriation of that energy. It's been on my mind lately, but I like hearing, people who obviously have been in it in both realms. I have particular insight, so I appreciate you sharing very much.
Yeah, this reminds me of a story. I was actually kicked out of, I forgot. I was kicked out of a group. It was called The Christian Herbalist. I don't know if it still exists or not, but I think anything that has like a "the" at the front, you probably want to just take care of, you know what I mean? But I was part of this group at the very beginning, very, very, very beginning of my journey. And because it felt safe, because when I started taking the herbal classes, I kept that a secret for a while too, because it was forbidden, But I asked in that group one day if anybody would like to discuss plant communication. Now, I had not had the experience of plant communication yet, but I heard whispers of it and I was kind of curious. And the way I was feeling was, well, if that's how the world works, if that's how it's been created, I want to experience it, right? I don't want to miss out. So I just put, would anyone like to discuss plant communication? And I was kicked out of the group within 24 hours. That question, I didn't even say it's true or it's real or I had even done it, caused such a flurry that the owner kicked me out of the group. And I was a little feisty, partly because she wasn't in my church, so I could be feistier. But I said to her, your God is very small, because she was saying, you're a witch, you're a diviner, you're a creature worshiper, you're not giving glory to God. We talk about misappropriation. And I said to her, no, that's not what's happening at all. What I experienced with the plants is just making it all bigger and more amazing and fantastic and wonderful. They're just portals. Like, I appreciate them in and of themselves, just like I would a person, but all of these things are also portals, to experiencing the divine. So I was kicked out of that group. But when it comes to misappropriation, the interesting thing about that is, and I think I wrote a blog post about this for the Matthew Wood Institute when you asked us, what is a healer? Are you a healer? That the plants are just, they're tools. They're beautiful, effective tools. But our engagement is required, and it's what's paramount. So even to put it onto the plants is to put it outside of the divine that is in us, the healer, that's inside of each of us.
Amanda, we can go in so many directions. I love our conversations.
I'm glad I get to talk. I don't get to talk a lot.
Let's definitely do it again. I think the next series I want to do is one on trauma, and you absolutely came to mind. And because, of course, marrying it with herbs, and I love your perspective. I love talking with you.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you for letting me talk. I'm with kids a lot. I don't teach as much anymore, and I still do one-on-ones, and then I'm writing. So I don't use my voice even for the podcast as much as I used to. So thank you, because it helps me even just keep processing, just keep alchemizing. So I really appreciate it. Thank you, Tara.
It's been an absolute pleasure, and holy moly, just incredible to see your evolution as well, and I mean that with just total admiration and respect. Just wow. And it's been a pleasure.
Thank you. That's kind.
So I don't know, it brings me to tears, really. So we'll talk again soon. I look forward to it.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.